Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this special program. We're going to be talking with Dr. Vincent T. DeVita, who has been one of the most influential researchers and physicians in the oncology care arena. Dr. DeVita has received many honors over the years, including a Giants of Cancer Care Award in 2013. He is perhaps best known for helping to usher in the modern era of chemotherapy in the mid-1960s with his development of a 4-drug regimen for the treatment of patients with Hodgkin's lymphoma. His colleagues named that discovery one of the top advances in modern oncology in an oncology poll. Now, Dr. DeVita has written a book about his experiences in cancer research and treatment called The Death of Cancer. My name is Maurie Markman, and I'm the President of Medicine and Science at Cancer Treatment Centers of America and the Editor-in-Chief of Oncology Live magazine. I'd like to welcome Dr. DeVita and thank him for joining me in this program. The title of the book, The Death of Cancer, after 50 years on the front lines of medicine, a pioneering oncologist reveals why the war on cancer is winnable and how we can get there. So my first question, I think many people would like to know, is why did you write the book, Vince?
I think, the American people paid over $100 billion in taxes for the war on cancer. And I was in an unusual position in the sense that I was in the right place at the right time. I was there at the Cancer Institute before the Cancer Act was passed. The work I did was partly responsible for the philanthropist Mary Lasker getting interested in cancer. And then I wound up running the whole program. And then I wound up outside at 2 major cancer centers. And then I had the opportunity to be president of the American Cancer Society. As if I didn't have enough experience, I got cancer myself. So I said to myself, person in that position should really recount their experiences so that people know what they got for their money from somebody who actually saw it happening. So I did it, and I did it with my daughter, Elizabeth, who's a tremendous writer, so to keep me honest and to help me translate what I was doing. The book is actually meant for lay people, not for doctors and nurses. Some people think it's only written for doctors and nurses. It's not. So that's the reason why I wrote it.
So I certainly appreciate that, and in reading it, I absolutely appreciate the fact, I think my wife has read it, that it was written for the lay audience. So I guess my question is, what is and the history is magnificent, and of course, again, I had the opportunity to live some of that with you and very indirectly. What is the major message you would say that you want to leave, or you wanted to leave and have left with those who've read the book?
Well, the major message is what you've already mentioned, that the war on cancer not only is winnable, but it's actually being won. People don't appreciate the significant change in the whole cancer field since the Cancer Act was passed way back in 1971. I mean, the mandate of the war on cancer was to support research, the application of the results of research to reduce the incidence, morbidity, and mortality from cancer. In the Cancer Act itself, there was never any mention of time span. It didn't say by the bicentennial. That was Mary Lasker's little thing to get the Congress moving. And so since 1971, we have put, 65% of the $100 billion has gone into support research, a lot of money in research. Incidence and mortality rates have been coming down since 1990, 1991. Morbidity from cancer, it's never easy to be treated with cancer, but the morbidity is way less than it was. If you look at mastectomies, for example, when breast cancer, when we were starting out, you had a radical mastectomy, chest wall was denuded, the arm, after radiation, again, the chest wall would swell up, and didn't do anything much because the cells had already gotten out. So it was a highly morbid and less effective treatment. Now we have lumpectomies with radiation therapy, save the breast, and mortality from breast cancer has come down 25%. Overall, national mortality has come down 25%. Probably more because these data are 5 years old. So when they get to actually measure 2016, it's probably going to be more like 35% because it's been very steady decline. So that's the message, is that we're not only winning it, but it's winnable. And I mean the latter because I think the new stuff the targeted therapies, the immunologic therapies, are not even in these data.
Right.
They're just hitting the clinic, so the best is yet to come, and we know they're going to be good. So I think we need an optimistic message to people. And one of the reasons people are confused is that when we treat people with cancer, what we want them to do is go home and live a perfectly normal life, and they do. The great majority of them don't walk around and say, I had cancer, and some do, some become activists, but the great majority don't. And the ones you see generally are people who are suffering from it, and they're much more visible. So people don't appreciate how many people have been cured already of their cancer.
It's a very important message. And a very positive one. I guess at flip side, although it's very clear that you've written it for the lay public, is there a message also for medical professionals, either oncologists and or generalists?
Well, yeah, as I point out in the book, there are some doctors who are not enthusiastic about treating patients with cancer. There's always been this tug of war. You have cancer, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it's a lethal disease, so you don't treat it. If you don't treat it, it's a lethal disease. And some cancer patients get themselves in the hands of doctors who don't believe. And I think it's necessary, if the doctor says to you, you're newly diagnosed with cancer, and doctor says, you've got cancer, there's nothing I can do for you, you should find another doctor, because there's something you can do for virtually everybody nowadays with cancer.
Again, it's such a wonderful book, and it's actually, and we commented before, your daughter is obviously a terrific writer, and obviously the two of you together has just made just a wonderful story because it's written for the lay public. It's
right.
It's
That's
not
why
for
we did it that way, because she really has a talent for capturing, or getting the color in the story. There are a couple of places in the book. Jay Frarek telling me, when I told the story to her, Jay Frarek's telling me to give an antibiotic in a way that it's on the label says you don't do it. And I just told it that way, and she said, well, where were you? Well, I was standing on the 2 East floor. And, well, what happened? Well, I'm standing with Jay, he's 6'5", looming over me, and he pointed his finger, and then she gets all this color in the story, and it brings people into the book. I think I mentioned to you that I wrote 320,000 words, which would have been a book about 3 times this size. And I handed her the manuscript, and she handed it back to me at 110,000 words, the current book, and a much more readable fashion. And said to me, if no much point in writing a book if people don't read it. So this is much more readable. So without her, I think it would have been a completely different book.
So some of the conversations, some of the issues in the book, and one that we absolutely want to mention, discuss, and ask you to comment on is this concept of cure. And you make a point in the book of very clearly discussing that cancer is winnable, and you really want to advocate talking about cure. Do you want to comment about your thoughts on that?
Nowadays, I find that the fellows are not encouraged to use the word cure. So I'm a little of an outlier at Yale. We don't know that you're cured. It's very conservative. It's more like be a little afraid if you encourage them that they're cured and they relapse, then you take the blame for their relapsing. I think patients would rather be free of cancer. They don't want to be told that you're not cured, we can't be sure you're cured. They want to go home and feel comfortable. So I think there's a time almost with every cancer when you know that if they haven't relapsed after treatment, they're not likely to relapse. For example, in Hodgkin's disease, it turns out to be about 4 years. If they go into remission and stay in remission off treatment for 4 years, we're doing the 45-year follow-up of our first group of 188 patients. Those patients are cured. They're alive, free of disease, lived a perfectly normal life. And my feeling is you should say to them, you're cured, and give them the optimism for it. Now, we have very interesting things happening in the cancer field nowadays. The best example I know of is chronic myelocytic leukemia, where we're treating patients. This is a disease, when I started out, that was uniformly fatal. We could put patients in remission for a few short period of time, but it was uniformly fatal. Now they take a pill, and they live a perfectly normal life. And then when they develop resistance to the pill, pharmaceutical industry has developed 4 others that they can take, and probably will keep doing that. So that you can always find the disease. So they aren't cured. They're just living a perfectly normal life. So we're now having a different category of patients who are able to live with their cancer for a normal life, as opposed to those who have no evidence of cancer. And I think we'll see more of that. I think using some of the immunotherapy approaches, I think we're seeing patients whose cancer just goes into abeyance, but they still have evidence of disease if you look hard enough. So it's a new category, so you need to explain that difference to patients. But when it's possible to say with some confidence they're cured, I like to say, you're very likely cured of your disease. So.
Vincent, in the book, you're quite open and honest and eloquent in your description of your own experience with cancer, but also with the experience of your son and his illness. How has that influenced you, your thoughts at the time, but also now for the future?
Well, my son had aplastic anemia, and he was put into a laminar airflow room to protect him from getting infections. And he stayed there for about 8 years, and except for some excursions out in what we call the spacesuit. We worked with NASA and let him walk out with the spacesuit. He never left that room. And I thought I had a lot of empathy for parents of children who died of leukemia or had leukemia, but it was a whole different experience to go through it myself. I think it made me a better doctor. It changed me in a whole host of other ways. My own cancer, I developed prostate cancer, and I think I did what a lot of doctors do, tend to ignore, do what I say, not what I do. And when I finally was diagnosed, and it was a difficult case, the prostate was very large, I realized that what I normally did for patients, to navigate for them and find places for them to go to get the best therapy, I couldn't do for myself. So I had to ask my colleague Steve Rosenberg to do that for me. He did a great job and steered me to, I think, one of the finest surgeons in the country, Peter Scardino. So it gave me an insight into, being in the medical system, how difficult. I knew it was, but when you experience it firsthand, it's a little bit different. So it changed me quite a bit.
I want to ask you about, you discuss a number of controversies throughout your career at the NCI, Maurie, Yale, starting with sort of the resistance to combination chemotherapy. And so I guess my question is, sort of looking back, or even now, why do you see was there so much reluctance to these innovative approaches, which we now are standard of care? And really the question goes is, but today I certainly see reluctance to novel ideas. Someone comes up with an idea, let's try combination immunotherapy with targeted therapy, for example. And you talk about that in the book. There's so much resistance to doing something new and novel. Your thoughts on this?
Well, let's do it in 2 parts. The second part I'll come back to. First part was in the 1960s, the thought that you could cure cancer with drugs was considered insane. And the doctors who were doing it were in fact called insane. And the methods were fairly crude, so that they had all kinds of, epithets that were thrown around at grand rounds at people who were trying to do this were extraordinary. I was a young doctor, and I knew when I came from a university that nobody at a university would tolerate people doing that at a university. So it was just considered madness. Using drugs in combination was considered bad medicine. Now, and it primarily stemmed from using antibiotics in combination. So they were relatively benign. When you started using toxic cancer drugs in combination, when they, in their minds, had no hope of doing anything except make patients sick, it was considered just too far out. So the environment that we did this in was the Cancer Institute, and that was a somewhat protected environment where we could actually do these things, take some criticism, but nothing stopped you from doing it. You were sort of limited by what was between your ears. It would have been impossible to do it elsewhere. I went to Yale took some time off to finish my residency, and I tried to implement some of these things at Yale, and I was told in no uncertain terms, this is nuts, and I turned around and came back to the Cancer Institute. Today I do see the same thing. I see people who still are reluctant to do innovative things. For example, we have proof of principle that we need combinations of different agents to cure cancer, with very few exceptions. You need combinations. In fact, we're looking at it now in melanoma with the immunotherapy, where clearly immunotherapy that combined is better than a single immunologic agent. I don't know why we have to keep proving this all over again, but we're proving it all over again because the FDA requires us to prove it all over again. And I think the FDA is still in the last century. It needs to come into this century, and we talk about that quite a bit in the book. And I think one of the problems we have is we're overregulated. And doctors are fearful that if they do something a little off the beaten path, then they will, be penalized for it and lose their ability to do research or be considered not collegial and so on.
So you discussed the concerns. You certainly mentioned the FDA in the book. I guess I would ask you, how can we change the situation? Obviously, I feel similar frustration. The advances that have occurred are spectacular. The advances that could occur are far greater. And yet we are in an environment, as you described in the book very eloquently, painfully slow. And of course, the FDA, their rules, as you discussed, go back 60 years. What can we do to fix this?
Well, one thing I tried to do was write the book. I thought it's possible we could get the attention of the only people who could really fix this, which would be the Congress. I think what happens today is that doctors don't realize where they are. They've been backed into a situation where the FDA essentially is practicing medicine and directing research. If you look at we do a handbook on chemotherapy, you look at the back of it with a given drug. It'll tell you this drug has been approved for use after they've had this drug, before they've had that drug, after they had this drug, and at this stage, and so forth. I mean, this is somebody 3,000 miles away from the patient telling you exactly when you can use it. And most of the innovative stuff that's going on is usually done in the after-marketing period. And so the FDA essentially has paralyzed the after-marketing period by doing this. So I think there's a simple solution. And I talk about it in the book. I think that the FDA and the National Cancer Institute should delegate all phase 1 and 2 clinical trials completely to the cancer centers. That is, the FDA and the NCI could reserve the right to come in and do audits. They have it now, they could do it then. But they should delegate all the responsibilities. So you can start a phase 1 trial in your cancer center, and you don't have to go back. If you want to make changes, you don't have to go back to the NCI or the FDA. You can make changes with your own internal review committees, and you can do that for phase 2 studies where most of the good stuff is happening. I also think that the FDA should change how it approves drugs. It should approve drugs based on their safety, but safety in the context of the patient that it's going to be used in. Safety is a different creature when you're using it for an antihypertensive drug that a patient is going to take for the rest of their lives versus a cancer patient where it's cure or not cure in a very short period of time. But safety is important. Safety and the ability to hit a target, a biologic target. So if you develop a drug to hit a receptor that you know is important and it hits that receptor, they should approve it. And you put it into the therapeutic armamentarium for the doctors, and the doctors are able to mix and match the way they want to use the drugs. And I describe a meeting that in the early days we call the Society of Jabbering Idiots. It was actually the best meeting I've ever been to in my career because it was essentially a war room where all the data that was going on the wards was matched with the data in the labs, and we could make adjustments to the protocol and go right on the ward and do it. Nowadays, it can take 800 days to take those adjustments back through the review system. You delegate the responsibility for this to the cancer centers. They could each have their own Society of Jabbering Idiots where you have excitement, know the biologic pathways, know the mutations, and be able to mix and match therapies. what's intriguing about this is that it would not only make things a lot easier, it would cost less. You don't need an infusion for the moonshot to change this. You just need the FDA and the National Cancer Institute to give up some power and authority. Unfortunately, in Washington, no institution gives up power and authority voluntarily. So they're going to have to be squeezed to do it. But cancer centers were developed to do this. And although I criticized them in the book because they had growing pains, a lot of them are at the point where they could do this now and do this easily. And they have many more experts to do this than the FDA will ever have in their entire life. So that and the whole compassionate use program, it needs to be taken from the FDA and put back where it was in the 1970s.
You've covered a lot of ground. So you did, again, in the book, very eloquently express your frustrations, including with your experience at the cancer centers. So, so one question is, and you sort of alluded to this, is the culture of the cancer centers changing, particularly those that are the matrix organizations that are not entirely focused on cancer, more academically oriented? Is that changing? And I guess the question is, do we need to sort of rethink, not the concept of cancer centers, but rethink the way they're structured, they're organized, who's in charge, how you fund them, and why you fund them? Because it's a really regulatory environment now, and even in the cancer centers, and academics. So what are your thoughts?
The answer is yes and yes. The long answer would take another hour. The answer is yes. I mean, I'm at Yale. I criticize Yale a lot. The deficit they have for having me at that institution is that I could see it firsthand and I could describe what was wrong with it. We've come a long way, and we're really much better in terms of the emphasis on the application of the results of research. When I went to Yale, there was virtually no, they were concerned with doing research, but the application side was very neglected and it was very hard to get it going. Now, Roy Herbst is our chief of medical oncology. He's doing a wonderful job in application of results. So yes, they're changing. And I think, not all, I've just recently had an experience in a cancer center in this country that I won't mention, where there was, they had no essence of teams. All of our cancer centers have teams of people working. If you have lung cancer, you're seen by a team of people. And this center, there was nothing even resembling a team, and patient was just going, one patient to one doctor to another in sequence. So I think they've come a long way. So I mean, I think they could handle the delegation of clinical trials to cancer centers.
So now I want to turn to research, and I'm going to ask you, it's unfair, but I'm going to do it anyway, ask you to put on your crystal ball. I mean, we talked about immunotherapy. Again, it's just having been in the immunology branch all those years ago when we thought we would cure cancer. If you remember, we had a trial where actually it was BCG and neuraminidase-treated tumor cells. I mean, my God, when you think about that now, we say, I can't believe it, but where we now are is incredible. And obviously, we've learned a lot. So, and then there's this whole area of precision medicine and genomics and proteomics. Where do you think this is going to go? Your thoughts, what is the future? Is it immunotherapy? Is it targeted therapy? Is it a combination? And just based on your experience and what you see, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's in the next to last chapter of the book. I call it called Death of Cancer. I go over the 8 hallmarks of cancer that Weinberg and Hanahan wrote about in a landmark paper, and point out that we basically, when we're successful, we're attacking 2 or 3 of the hallmarks, and in the future we're going to have to be thinking about attacking all of the hallmarks. Immunotherapy is just one. Immunosurveillance is one of or the failure of immunosurveillance is one of them. And it was in 1996, I believe, when the discovery of the checkpoint inhibitors changed our whole thinking. We struggled for years trying to figure out why we couldn't boost the immune system to eradicate cancer. And when we did, like when Steve Rosenberg did IL-2 with infusions of lymphocytes, and you got marvelous responses in 10 or 15% of the patients, but the rest of them didn't get any. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And Jim Allison, I think, solved the problem for us because he pointed out the existence of checkpoints, and now we have checkpoints inhibitors that are already on the market and have changed the face of immunotherapy. I don't think immunotherapy by itself will be just the answer to cancer. I think it'll be coupled with chemotherapy and other forms of treatment if we have the freedom to put them together. I mean, so I say in the book, anti-hallmark therapy, good luck in the current regulatory environment, because the FDA forces drug companies to test their drugs one at a time. And what you need to do is test things in combination.
So can we fix that? Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you delegated the phase 1 clinical trials and phase 2 clinical trials to cancer centers, you could do it any way you wanted to. All you had to do was assure the safety of patients and have the effective oversight. And we all have our health, human investigation committees. So yeah, you could, it's fixable. And it's fixable pretty quickly. And it's fixable at less cost than the current cost, which means it can't possibly be done. You know, here you have an idea that actually would work and cost less money and would advance the cause of cancer treatment, prevention, diagnosis by a great deal.
It's just actually not a lot of the conversation because of our focus on, your focus, my focus on treatment. You had a comment about the concept of cancer prevention. It's been very difficult to do, and it's very difficult to prove, and complexities. Any comment about the future of cancer prevention from your perspective? Yeah,
I mean, there's no question. Everybody would rather not have cancer than have it. It's just hard to prove a negative, and prevention studies are very expensive. And I remember when we first began to think about fat in the diet and breast cancer, when I was at the National Cancer Institute, people were saying, you know, spend money on prevention. We said, okay, we'll develop a clinical trial to look at low-fat diets compared to standard diets and see if we could reduce the incidence of breast cancer. And so I had the people work it up, and I presented it to the board and said, okay, you want to do it? We need your approval. It's going to cost $150 million. They almost died. $150 million, and the odds of it succeeding were probably, you know, between slim and none. They're very expensive studies, and you have leads that are not as solid as you would like. And so we do know one thing, that if you don't smoke, you're going to be, your chances of dying of cancer are way, way less. So I think one of my beefs, and on the line of beef and pork, there's a lot of literature on recently about bacon and the risk of colon cancer. And I get emails from people saying, you know, what do you do? And it's true, if you ate, you know, bacon every day, that your risk of colon cancer would be up a little bit. But if you're facing a patient who's smoking, and you tell them that they should stop eating bacon and eat less beef, and you don't stop them from smoking, you know, if you put them on a scale, the bacon's down here, and smoking is up through the ceiling. And we know that if you stop people from smoking, it works. And we've seen it, that lung cancer mortality is dropping largely because of smoking cessation. So we could still do a lot. We could still drop mortality from cancer another 30% if we just completely stop smoking. But otherwise, it's a very difficult thing to do. We do have chemoprevention now, drugs that seem to accelerate the decline in the risk for cancer. And I think one of the unstudied areas is looking at chemoprevention in people who quit smoking. You know, it takes 15 years for the risk of lung cancer to go down to near baseline if you quit smoking. Maybe 10 years for head and neck cancer. But still, it takes time. But if you gave these people chemopreventive agents, would you be able to accelerate the decline in the risk so that they would now, you know, maybe in 5 years, go down to baseline levels? We don't really have studies like that, and I think we could do them. It would be important for two things. One, it would prevent cancer sooner, and two, it would be great motivation for people to quit smoking. You say, 'cause a lot of people tell you, well, I've smoked so long, what difference does it make? The answer is it makes a difference even if you just stop it. But if you stop it and you take a chemopreventive agent, then you could you know, maybe in 5 years all your risk is gone. So.
What is your feeling having been named one of the original giants of cancer care several years ago?
Well, it's a great accolade. I mean, it's nice to be recognized by your peers, and the company was a pretty heady company. So all the people I've admired over the years were in that group, and continue to be added to the group. So I think it's a great honor, and I think people look forward to being considered to be a giant of cancer care.
So Vincent, you're obviously many years as a teacher, as a organizer of medicine, as a researcher. What would you consider to be some of the major advances, breakthroughs over these many years?
Well, I mean, there are almost too many to mention because if you look across the field. But if you think of cancer treatment, there have been 3 paradigm shifts that I think have made a major impact. The first was the ability to cure advanced cancer with combination chemotherapy. That opened up the whole field of adjuvant treatment for breast cancer and colorectal cancer. The second was when Brian Drucker put targeted therapy on the map in chronic myelocytic leukemia with a drug that hit the BCR-ABL mutation. That came targeted therapy, and we're now using that approach in lung cancer, melanoma, and lots of cancers as we sequence the genome and find the targets. And the third has been the discovery of the checkpoints in immunotherapy. I think those are the 3 paradigm shifts that occurred in cancer treatment in my lifetime that are all having a significant impact on the ability to treat cancer.
So just one final question. What are you doing these days? Obviously, you wrote your book, and I know you're still active in talking and to audiences like this. How do you spend your time?
Well, the books have taken, I had to do the textbook. We put out this Principles and Practice of Oncology, and we just started in the 11th edition. I don't know why I'm doing this, but it's great fun because it keeps me up to date. The way we prepare the book with 3 editors and so on is a tedious but important process, a learning process for me, so I spend a lot of time doing that. And this other book took a lot of time. I see patients in consultation. I don't follow them anymore. So I'll see them in consultation and then turn them over to a younger doctor to take care of them and teach. That's it's part of the benefit of growing older. Is you have more time to sit back and look at the field and make judgments about it.
Vince, I just can't thank you enough. At a personal level, as a teacher of generations of oncologists, medical oncologists, surgical oncologists, radiation oncologists, and what you've done for current patients, future patients. You are absolutely a giant of cancer care. It's an honor for me to know you and to work under you, and I thank you very much.
You're very kind to say that, Maurie.
Thank you very much.
Very good to see you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.